The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I've been talking to you for years about this really sickening alliance that exists between the United States and Saudi Arabia. And we've talked about how Saudi Arabia, in spite of sharing many of the same extremist religious views as many of our enemies in the Middle East, are one of our greatest allies. And about 2 weeks ago, the Saudi defense minister, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, announced that Saudi Arabia would lead a coalition of Muslim nations around the world in order to help fight terrorism vis-a-vis the Islamic State. Great news, right? I mean, fantastic, except for the fact that many of the views of the Islamic State are shared by Saudi Arabia's extremist form of Islam, Wahhabism. But at least Saudi Arabia wants stable extremist regimes rather than belligerent extremist terrorists or something, I guess, Lewis. Maybe it's marginally better.
Well, if whatever a nation ends up, if Iraq or Syria end up being basically like Saudi Arabia,
yeah,
which I guess they kind of basically were like before, maybe not as religious, it's better than what it would be right now, right?
I don't think we could argue with that. However, here's the other side of the equation. On the one side, we have Saudi Arabia saying they are fighting terror, but as Ring of Fire writes, Saudi royals have been financing terrorist organizations for over 40 years, and Republican presidential candidates are not talking about it. Remember that most of the 9/11 hijackers were Saudis, but also Hillary Clinton is not talking about it. We don't hear Bernie Sanders talking about it too much, although he's talked about it a little bit. And remember, according to intelligence reports, there is a high likelihood that the hijackers of 9/11 were aided and abetted by officials of the Saudi government. We've heard from former Senator Bob Graham of Florida that he claims the FBI is withholding information about this. Republican candidates aren't talking about it. Secretary of State Clinton in 2009 publicly identified Saudi Arabia as, quote, the most significant source of funding to Sunni terrorist groups worldwide. Has anybody heard Hillary Clinton talking about the Saudis now that she's running for president? You'd think this would be a terrific opportunity for her to call out the Republican candidates for not talking about it. But no, because she essentially seems as complicit in the whole thing as everybody else. And on Salon.com, David Masiotra, I think is the correct pronunciation of his name, wrote that the alliance between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. is, quote, mostly a one-way relationship in which the U.S. is subservient and obsequious, essentially a harem to the Saudi royal family who collect all the benefits and rewards. Why aren't they talking about this?
Maybe the oil is just that important, or maybe they think it is really important to have what I guess you could call an ally in Saudi Arabia. I don't know. I mean, they can take care of themselves. Maybe we just need the oil.
Maybe so. And maybe it's the interest in sort of a certain type of stability in the Middle East that Saudi Arabia shares an interest in. The past year, don't forget that it has been a banner year for Saudi Arabia in terms of human rights violations. The Saudi government has publicly beheaded more so-called criminals over the last year than at any time over the past 2 decades, includes offenses such as abandoning faith, leaving Islam, or practicing witchcraft. I mean, literally an imaginary fantasy world so-called crime. The government routinely tortures and murders its own citizens as well as foreigners, yet we continue the relationship and we don't have any serious critique of that alliance coming from our Republican and Democratic candidates. The Saudi Arabia thing is perverse, and there is no sign at all that it is going to change anytime soon.
No, I don't imagine so. I think it's an allegiance that the military-industrial complex wants to keep, that the generals want to keep, and that the administration has always wanted to keep. So yeah, where's it going to go?
I told you yesterday about the affluenza teen, Ethan Couch. This is the guy who, drunk driving, killed 4 people, and then was sentenced to only probation, at least partially on the basis that because he was raised by a rich family, a privileged family, he was never really taught that his actions have consequences in the real world, so thus it would be unfair to punish him more harshly. That was in a juvenile court. Now, the recent news has been that he was on the run. He missed a check-in with his probation officer and was on the run with his mom. And yesterday I told you that Ethan Couch and his mom had been apprehended in Mexico. And I said yesterday he could potentially face up to a couple of years in prison. It turns out now we know more, and he risks only, at the most, 120 days in jail. Even though he is now 18, his probation is still being handled by juvenile court, which means officials would only be able to put him in detention until his 19th birthday in April, when he would have to be released. Now, there is a petition to move him over to adult court on the basis that now he really should just be in adult court. This should be, even though originally it was based on something he did as a juvenile, now that he has violated probation, those violations now are happening as an adult, and thus it should be moved to an adult court. It does not seem like that is going to happen. That is not the easiest thing to do. So yesterday we said, Lewis, maybe now a couple of years in prison. Unlikely, maximum of 120 days, and who knows if he will even get that.
Right. I predict that that will be shorter, and it's not really a surprise. Yeah, of course he should be tried as an adult. At this point, it should be treated as an adult. He is an adult, and he violated parole as an adult.
Now, not parole, probation.
Or probation.
Going forward, if now or at some point in the future, even if now it doesn't go over to an adult court, one legal expert said that if he violates probation again, then it would automatically go to an adult court. If he then violated his probation again, there is the potential that he could spend 40 years in adult prison. But is it even worth discussing that at this point? I mean, it's so far-fetched.
Yeah, it's possible. And it's possible that he could have spent a couple years in prison because of this violation, but that's not what's going to happen.
Do you feel like this is a sort of George Zimmerman type situation where we definitely haven't seen the last of Ethan Couch?
Well, I don't think so. I think George Zimmerman is different because he seems like a homicidal maniac. And I don't think that that's the case with Ethan Couch. But I don't know if he decides that he doesn't want to check in again. And next time I would advise him to go somewhere a bit more remote.
And apparently the entire being on the run started because he was caught on video drinking, which was already a violation of his probation. So then he decided just to skip out on the meeting with the probation officer, assuming that the video was going to be an issue. Maybe 120 days in jail would turn him around, although our incarceration system is not really good at rehabilitation. It's better at making people even more hardened criminals than whatever got them into jail in the first place. So I would actually be concerned that if he gets 120 days in jail, this guy might come out and then do something really bad.
Well, also prison doesn't fix stupid. So I think Mr. Couch is in trouble for the rest of his life.
There have been some big headlines over the last 24 hours about a campaign event in Iowa that Democratic presidential candidate Martin O'Malley did, where only one person showed up, and the pictures have been just all over the place. Now, none of the reports have mentioned that some presidential candidates actually canceled their events in Iowa yesterday because there was this huge winter storm, and Martin O'Malley decided to keep the event on. Fine, he keeps the event on. One guy shows up, and here's the amazing part about it. That one guy who braved a snowstorm to go to the Martin O'Malley event is not even an O'Malley supporter. He's still trying to figure out who he's going to support in the February 1st Iowa caucuses. And Martin O'Malley said, yeah, I sat down with this guy and worked on him, but he's not even ready yet to decide who it is that he's going to support. And there was a tweet shared by a reporter where they shared the picture of the bearded man identified only as Kenneth, saying that indeed Martin O'Malley was, quote, working on him. Is this sad? Is it embarrassing? Is it funny? Is it inspiring that Martin O'Malley held the event in spite of the weather?
I think that it is, first of all, I don't know why he's still in the race. Right. I just don't see the point. What is he trying to prove? Are his donors really going to be upset if he drops out at this point? I don't know what he's trying to achieve. I kind of feel bad for someone who goes to an event and has only one person there.
You mean for O'Malley,
Right.
who holds an event and only one person? Yeah, I mean, it's easy to sort of sling mud at O'Malley, but he did show up in spite of bad weather. He stuck around, and he had a detailed political discussion with the person who showed up. Should not we be respecting that?
I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't know. He's a man of his word. What can we really take from this? But why are you bothering at this point?
You're saying rather than respect, maybe we should see it as just a waste of time because O'Malley has no shot. Now,
Hey,
if
well,
Hillary
if
were
he
to
wants,
do this,
it's his time. It's his money.
Yeah.
At this point, it's his money. It came from other people, but maybe he's using his own money. I don't know.
but if Hillary showed up at an event, she's the front runner, right? If she showed up at an event and only one person showed up and she spent a bunch of time with that person, would we see it differently because she's in this race in a serious way?
I think I would see it differently.
But either way, it's just one person. Whether it's one person who is Hillary's talking to or O'Malley, either way, the election is not going to hinge on that one person.
Well, here's why I think that it should be viewed differently. Because if I were to see, not me, if someone were to see Hillary sitting down with one person, because Hillary already has a very good chance, that might help her. It might help her image. If someone sees Martin O'Malley sitting down with one person, while they might think it's great, it doesn't mean it's not going to help his chances at winning. Because
so you're saying, let me see if I can interpret what you're saying. O'Malley
I'm talking
has
purely from a PR standpoint.
With O'Malley, it almost seems of desperation because the guy has no support and he braves the snow to have one guy show up. With Hillary,
if Hillary did it, it would seem like charity.
It would seem almost like, in spite of the fact that she doesn't need one vote, she's still willing to sit down and have a conversation.
Right.
So you see it more as a PR benefit. Maybe. I mean, Rick, we talked to you on June 9th about Rick Santorum running an event and one person showed up. And it was just completely pathetic in that situation. And it struck me as completely different. Maybe it's because Rick Santorum is a lunatic and Martin O'Malley actually has a lot of interesting things to say.
I think he's a pretty level-headed guy. And I wish he could have done better. But welcome to the machine.
I think there was a missed opportunity here. If you have one guy show up and you're a presidential candidate, turn it into a really big PR stunt. Take the guy to an amusement park, although it's winter, I don't know. Take the guy drinking, or you could have turned this into a really good PR opportunity where he says, join me for dinner. Let's go to dinner. And then those pictures come out. That would have been, I think, the opportunity for Martin O'Malley here.
Yes, but it still wouldn't have helped much, would it?
No, it probably would not have changed the outcome of the Iowa caucuses, which will be on February 1st. Those are coming up. Remember that I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at Louis Motamedi. That's LOUIS MOTAMEDI. And the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. We'll take a break. Fantastic pre-New Year's Eve show today for you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program has the absolute honor of not depending on big corporations or media conglomerates for funding, but rather is funded by you, our viewers and our listeners, through something called membership. Today's new member of the day is Carmen Salgado. Carmen, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. You can join Carmen at davidpakman.com/membership. And Friday, January 1st, 2016, we will be having a huge 2016 membership special. It is related to 2016 in some way. All you need to do to be notified about that special this Friday is to get on our newsletter mailing list at davidpakman.com. Let's get to Hatriot Mail. This is the last Hatriot Mail of 2015. But what is Hatriot Mail anyway?
Because it's God's divine plan that every child be born, but an act of patriotic duty to snuff that bastard if he sets a foot near your stuff. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
So tomorrow on the last David Pakman Show of 2015, we're going to be talking about some of the top stories of the year, one of which, no question, is the increase in marijuana legalization and decriminalization. Yesterday, I told you the number of people who died from a marijuana overdose in 2014, the last year for which we have data. That number was 0, but that does not stop the marijuana anger from coming through in Hatriot Mail, and that is exactly the topic of this week's Hatriot Mail. Let's take a listen to that.
Unsubscribed. Yes, yes, I'm staying away from all the morons involved in the production, distribution, or presentation of the David Pakman Show. You were so far from the truth on the video released about marijuana addiction and overdose, I can't believe anything else you or your team reports is accurate at all. I'm so glad you and Lewis, who looks like a bum you cleaned up this morning, talks like one too, share the same moronic degenerate opinion. You literally are tools of stupidity. And like about marijuana, you don't know anything about science. And I again could find better information in a few searches that isn't full of shit and plainly made up shit your team thinks is logical enough so the morons that continue to subscribe won't catch on. Don't worry, they are as degenerate and inbred as you. Possibly slightly less, but overall just as stupid. I can tell by the look in both these people's eyes. Their heads are full of shit, and I just can't give a flying what these morons erroneously believe. I'm out of your circles, diapers. Stay dirty, douches.
Yeah, this is such a misunderstanding. We had a guest on who said, yeah, there is such a thing conceptually as a marijuana overdose. But when we're talking about a fatal overdose, no, there have not been any. Conceptually speaking, though, you can overdose. I mean, you can overdose on almost anything. But a lot of anger, Lewis, a lot of anger about marijuana. And then there's the people who are angry with us because they think we're promoting smoking pot when we point out the hypocrisy of marijuana being illegal.
Yeah, alternatively, this could have been a Hatriot who thinks that people do die from pot, or it could have been one of those really crazy anti-pot people.
Yeah, like Nancy Grace, for example.
Nancy
CNN
Disgrace.
Headline News. Yeah, very nice. Okay, that's it for Hatriot Mail for 2015. Big things in Hatriot Mail coming next year. Donald Trump has done a ton of bragging about how he has been doing so well in the Republican primary in spite of not spending any money on campaign ads, but he is changing his tune on that. Trump told a rally earlier this week in Nashua, New Hampshire, the site of the February 9th primary election, that he is soon going to begin spending big money, millions of dollars, to win the early primaries. To date, he appears to have spent only a little over $200,000 on advertising, compared with, for example, $41 million spent by Jeb Bush and his allied super PAC. But Trump says that is changing, that starting on January 4th, which is the first Monday of 2016, he will be spending a lot of money, about $2 million a week on ads. Let's take a look at this tweet that Donald Trump sent out. My campaign for president is $35 million under budget. I have spent very little and am in first place. Now I will spend big in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. I welcome this hugely. I mean, Trump will not be the Republican nominee. Anything that extends this fantasy world he has created in the Republican Party is a good thing. Spend $4 million a week for all I care.
Well, inject some stimulus into broadcast television and big corporate media. Whatever, everyone else is doing it, and this money is going to have probably no impact on his, on his accounts overall.
Oh, on his account. I was going to say, is it going to have any impact on the race? Because we've hypothesized.
Might help a little.
We've hypothesized that the Trump voter is, number one, primarily a low information voter, and number two, completely confused about whether they're even conservative, because half the stuff Trump says are ideas that are mostly heard on the Democratic side than the Republican side. My sense is that by TV advertising, Trump is not really going to reach many more people that would even consider supporting him. So I'm curious as to the marginal return that Trump might get on this TV advertising. Maybe it will move the needle, Lewis, but I think Trump is rapidly approaching, if not already, at his sort of ceiling of support.
Yeah, but it could move more of the Bush supporters over. It could move more of the Rubio supporters over if they start realizing that it's between Cruz and Trump. The advertising might help in that way a little bit, but is it going to have a huge impact? Probably not.
We will see. I welcome the ads. I welcome the spending. And early next week, we should get a look at some of these first ads that Donald Trump will be running. I've mentioned before Katrina Pearson, who's a Trump spokesperson. She's the one who went on TV and defended Trump's Muslim ban idea by saying, so what? They're Muslim. She showed up on CNN yesterday with her own sort of fashion statement. Someone might want to tell her that these necklaces made of bullets are a little bit passé, but she showed up on CNN, and as if you're watching, you see she was wearing a necklace made of bullets. Here is a little bit of video of her on CNN.
Well, I don't necessarily call it an attack. It's more of a response to Hillary Clinton bringing up sexism, which is what she plans to do on any Republican that's running against her next year. And I think it is fair game. We're talking about a previous president, a president that has many issues with women.
If a Muslim person wore a bullet necklace on TV, what would the reaction be, Lewis?
Shock and awe and anger and outrage and a complete media sensation.
Absolutely. I mean, put aside the fact that the necklace is hideous. It looks like what I would expect the Walmart jewelry department, if it existed, maybe it does, I don't know, to put out there. How sick do you have to be to wear a bullet necklace on national television after the year of heinous violence that we have had, violence of all sorts? You wear a bullet necklace on television. You have to be depraved, don't you?
I don't know. It's a political campaign she's helping to run, so maybe she thinks the necklace will appeal to some libertarians, some gun nuts.
Well, I mean, we know that Donald Trump is attracting the lowest and most vile people to his campaign, and maybe the bullet necklace is the way to capitalize on that demographic.
I think the way to take this to the next level in terms of depravity or just ridiculousness would for her to make appearances wearing only the bullet necklace.
Absolutely.
Right?
And, I was thinking of who else wears bullet necklaces. Islamic terrorists sometimes wear all sorts of ammunition, all sorts of bullets around their necks. And we actually did a side-by-side. And if you're just listening, check this out online. On the left here, you see an Islamic terrorist wearing adorned with bullets. And then on the right, you see Donald Trump's spokeswoman, Katrina Pearson, wearing her interpretation of a bullet necklace. Who wore it better, Lewis? I mean, I feel like we're doing one of those e-shows. Who did wear it best?
Well, I say whoever's wearing the live rounds is definitely winning that one. No question.
Send me your thoughts on this. We will take a break. It is our second to last show of 2015. Remember to get on our newsletter at davidpakman.com if you would like to be notified Friday, January 1st, 2016, of a fantastic membership discount deal that will last only a few hours on the first day of the year.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Chuck Collins, who's an author and also a senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. He's also co-founder of Wealth for Common Good. Chuck, we've been talking about income and wealth inequality in the United States. We know some of the incredible statistics, like, for example, that the richest 20 Americans own more wealth than the entire bottom half of the country. I want to talk to you about the economic and social impact of that. But before, give us a sort of summary of how we even got to such an incredible gap when it comes to wealth.
Well, I've been tracking this for almost 30 years. So we basically have seen a gradual growing concentration of wealth at the top. I think there's no single cause. There's a number of reasons why that's happening. But I would argue that probably the single biggest driver is that various rules of the economy, tax policy, trade policy, et cetera, have benefited asset owners at the expense of wage earners. And so I think we're seeing assets expanding, wages being stagnant for almost 30 years. But it was really only 10 years ago that the median income was the median wealth was like $85,000. It's gone down, and this concentration at the top continues to defy gravity, really.
And when we think about, one element we've talked about is productivity for the average worker continues to increase. In other words, the average worker is producing, whether it be goods or services, more than ever before. but as you mentioned, their wage is not going up. And that, talk to us a little bit about that, right? I mean, the additional productivity that workers are creating is sort of being moved up in a redistribution of income, as some like to say, to those at the top of the income brackets and big corporations.
Yeah, so I would say a huge driver is, productivity's gone up, wages have stayed low. Most of that productivity gain, then the wealth and income gains from that have gone to not just really the top 1%, but what we're seeing really in the last 8 or 9 years is it's going to the top 1/10 of 1%, who've captured most of the income and wealth gains at the top. So that's clearly a driver. And, as the French economist Thomas Piketty has pointed out, if you just if that's the machinery, if left without intervening in any way, where we're heading is we're seeing going to a kind of a concentrated wealth, a sort of a plutocracy, where wealth continues to concentrate, wealth and power continue to concentrate at the top. So we have to do something to intervene in that inequality cycle.
So people can have different opinions as to whether this is moral or ethical, what we see happening. But let's not have that conversation. Let's have the conversation as to what is the economic impact of such wealth inequality, and then whether it's moral or not becomes sort of irrelevant if we can make some general assessments as to whether this is a good or bad thing for the economy at large. So how can we think about that?
Well, one thing to think is that this concentration of wealth actually kind of creates a huge amount of distortions and volatility in the economy. So you have real wages staying flat or falling for most of the population. That means that the aggregate demand, the consumer buying demand of people at the bottom and the middle is really not as engaged. And then at the very top, you have this unreal concentration of assets, which leads to sort of some unreal risk taking, meaning people at the very top, I'm talking about, the top 1% of households, are starting to move and a portion of their wealth into more financially speculative investments, investments that get higher returns than the real economy, which isn't, returning a lot in terms of interest or earnings. So you have this twin dynamic. You have stagnant wages on the bottom, and then you have concentrated wealth at the top, looking more and more venturing into the sort of speculative arena of the marketplace. And all of that leads to certain volatility, huge volatility. So just take the energy market today or the last couple of months, or real estate in major urban areas. Those are all local and national and global economies that are being distorted by these great inequities of wealth. And as we also know that it sort of undermines the traditional measures of growth. I mean, the International Monetary Fund is now showing at the global level how these inequalities actually undermine traditional measures of economic growth. So too much inequality is bad for the economy in a number of ways.
And what about the social impact? The economic analysis you've done is very clear. We've talked about it before. We've spoken to other economists about it. What about the sort of intangible social impact of such wealth inequality?
Well, I think what we know is that as societies become more unequal, there is a breakdown in solidarity where people no longer feel that they're in the same boat. And it actually increases sort of a sense of fear and polarization. I would argue in some ways our 2016 presidential election dynamics, where you have a Trump and a Sanders candidate, they're both emerging out of the same phenomena, which is this is what happens when middle classes collapse, when people feel like the economy is rigged against them. Whatever political analysis they take with that may send them in different directions, but the underlying problem is this polarization. So I think it leads to kind of a whole bunch of negative indicators. It's bad for health. It's bad for public health, even for very wealthy people. It's bad for social cohesion. It undermines sort of neighborhoods and communities when there are these volatile and destructive inequities. So I think it sort of pulls at our culture. It moves us in the wrong direction in terms of us as a society.
There's certain issues we talk about where there are very clear sort of action items or asks that the average individual can do in terms of engaging lawmakers or engaging with the political system or society, et cetera. With this one, it's been more difficult for us on the program to figure out what individuals can do. I mean, certainly it would be great to elect more politicians who would put in policies that would have a sort of equalizing effect to reduce this drastic income gap that we have. But what can the average person really do?
Well, I think continuing to talk to their friends and neighbors about why these inequalities matter, believe it or not, is very important, because I think as a society, we've gone from 10 years ago when we really didn't talk about it to a broader recognition and connect the dots. These inequalities really do affect the quality of life for all of us. Then I think there's a sort of three ways to think about the solutions. There's the things that raise the floor, like raising the minimum wage, creating a better sort of social safety net. That's what many, Canada and other European countries, the reason they have less inequality is they have a higher floor. There's also things that we can do to level the playing field. We shouldn't have one tax code for the wealthy and one for everyone else, one for global corporations and one for everyone else. We should have a level playing field in terms of those rules.
And
But I would say
isn't there a challenge there, though, in that those who have sort of set up the system the way it's set up have no real interest in allowing it to change, right? Those who benefit from that system would prevent it from changing to the extent that they're able.
Yeah, we're sort of in a little bit of a locked-in position, which is the power of concentrated wealth has captured certainly at the national level, captured our electoral system. So it's very hard to talk about rule changes that would meaningfully reduce this inequality. But I think if you look at the undercurrent, think about the number of students that are holding debt. There's a political constituency. Look at polls that show that the public supports taxing incomes on millionaires. 75% of the public now supports those kind of policies. So there's a realignment happening at the base, which I think will lead to a political realignment eventually, not in the short term, because you have a Congress that's pretty much beholden to the donor class. That's why I'm saying I think we also have to sort of put on the table policies that may not actually pass today, but we sort of build an understanding of why they're important, like taxing progressive inheritance taxes, taxing higher incomes at a certain level. There's a piece in the New York Times today that looks at the aggressive tax avoidance of people really in the top 1%. So we need to restore the progressivity of the tax system. That may not be wildly popular or politically feasible in the short term, but we got to keep beating that drum. Eventually there will be a realignment. Either that or we can become a kind of society we really don't want to be.
I'll tell everybody once again, we've been speaking with Chuck Collins. He's an author. He's a senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C., and the co-founder of Wealth for Common Good. Chuck, thank you so much for being on with us today.
Thank you, David. Good chatting with you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A Christian woman is claiming she diverted a tornado. Texas woman Sabrina Lowe says that her Christian faith gave her the power to redirect the tornado away from her home. She said 10 family members were visiting her apartment over the weekend when they heard the distinctive train noise of an approaching tornado. And then she said the following in what is just an amazing statement. We'll put it up on the screen for those of you that are watching along with us. We actually went outside and started commanding the winds because God had given us authority over the winds, the airways, and we just began to command this storm not to hit our area. We spoke to the storm and said, go to unpopulated places. It did exactly what we said to do because God gave us the authority to do that. It was an EF4 tornado, Lewis, with wind speeds up to 180 miles per hour. And it was among the 9 confirmed tornadoes that went through the Dallas area. By the way, killing 11 people and destroying more than 1,000 buildings. So she did the very Christian thing, which is steer the tornado away from her own family so that it would kill people in other parts of the state. Jesus would be very, very proud.
I know that she's just confused and
Right.
doesn't understand much about the world. And there's probably really nothing behind this statement other than ignorance, but it comes off as sounding so pompous and pious and righteous and
But
obnoxious.
isn't it evil too? I mean, because the tornadoes killed other people. They didn't go to unpopulated areas. They actually resulted in other people dying.
You think she's going to actually, think about this in a nuanced way like that? Come on.
She willingly turned a tornado onto the property of others. It sounds like a clear case of assault and battery, vandalism, and murder, right? I mean, think about what we're saying here. If she really was able to command a tornado to go elsewhere where it killed people, that is a crime. That is a criminal act.
Well, yeah, I think the super Christian thing to do would have been to say the tornado needs to stay right here. The tornado stays right here on us,
motionless.
We're gonna sacrifice ourselves
Not
for the
even
greater good.
But Lewis, think, if you can really control the winds, actually
You could disperse the tornado.
Disperse the tornado, end the tornado, right? It's amazing how
Or just ask your friend God to get rid of it.
what God has allowed you to do is super narrow. You can't impact the fact that the tornado exists or how strong it is or whatever, but you can redirect it to the next town over where it kills people there instead of your family. Why wouldn't God, if giving people these powers, allow them to just disperse the tornado altogether?
Why did God allow for tornadoes in the first place?
Well, to test people.
To test what? Their wind movement skills?
Yeah, and what's that? God works in mysterious ways, etc., so on and so forth. Is this mental illness, though? To believe you have special powers to change the wind and then you send it to another place where it kills people, that has to be mental illness. How is it not? Argue that it's not mental illness.
Okay, well, I mean, would you say that all people who think they're psychic are mentally ill?
No, I think a lot of them are scammers.
Well, no. I mean, if there are people who truly believe that they are psychic, I think the woman we had in studio truly believed she was a psychic, right?
Yeah.
Would you call her mentally ill?
I'm not a mental health professional.
So we'll say that we are not able to make these calls.
Yeah, I need someone to explain to me whether there's any explanation other than mental illness for believing that this woman, for this woman believing that she was able to, using the power of God, redirect a tornado by praying for it to go elsewhere. Explain to me how it's not mental illness if you have a way of doing so that is in any way coherent. Let's talk about 2016. We're at the end of 2015. We are about to start 2016. Economists, broadly speaking, are expecting 2016 to be a pretty good year. We'll likely see the same amount or more jobs created, 2.6 million we've seen over the last 12 months. Economists expect to match or exceed that during 2016. The job mix is going to shift, though, in part because of the digital revolution, in part because of technological unemployment. And I recently told you about this study from McKinsey and Company that estimates that about 45% of all activities humans perform in workplaces can be done or will be able to be done by software or machines. There are 5 categories of jobs in which McKinsey estimates that somewhere from 85 to 100% of the labor could be done by machines, computers, robots, or artificial intelligence, or some combination thereof. Let's take a look at the list, Lewis, if we may. Production workers, 3.2 million jobs. This includes, textiles and manufacturing, coding, painting, meat cutting. A lot of these can be done by increasingly sophisticated machines. Bookkeeping, accounting, auditing, and billing clerks. That's 2.1 million jobs. Software increasingly does a lot of those jobs. Small businesses are less and less reliant on these professionals in order to accomplish many of these tasks. There's still strong demand for more sophisticated auditors and accountants, etc., but increasingly these jobs are being taken over by computers. Mechanics and automotive technicians. Vehicles increasingly have software, and many times fixing vehicle problems is more a computer task than it is a mechanical task. More vehicles being connected to the internet will make it so that vehicles can be fixed remotely by essentially an IT professional. We then move to construction equipment operators. Increasingly sophisticated and efficient machines can do more with fewer people. Robotic dozers, robotic graders are on the way. And then lastly, bakers and butchers. These might seem like hands-on jobs, Lewis, but machinery increasingly is able to do very good jobs of both baking and cutting meat. So many industries that will be hit pretty hard by this.
Yeah, but I hope in many towns across America you will still have that super expensive local butcher shop with the local meats where you can get, a nice piece of steak for $25 a pound.
Well, I wonder if as a result of butchering becoming more automated, if hand butchering, or what we call butchering now, will become even more expensive, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, this meat is artisanally separated, which basically just means there's an actual butcher. That could become a thing. I could see it starting in Brooklyn at some point.
It really could. I mean, I wouldn't call it regression. I
No.
mean, there are already been situations where a person taking over a machine's job has already become a thing, right?
Yeah.
And some people appreciate that more. And hey, you know what? I guess I don't really have a problem with supporting that as long as the price isn't too outrageous, because you are technically helping people by doing that.
You absolutely are. And jobs not likely to be automated include home health aides, for example, management analysts, sales managers. Hard to have a computer motivate a group of salespeople, I guess. At least we haven't figured out a way right now. Religious clergy. Imagine replacing pastors, Lewis, with robots.
I don't think it would be that difficult, right? I mean, we know what they're going to say. We know how they deliver those speeches. You could
Yeah.
just pretty much program a machine to do that, and I think there would be just as much money coming into the church.
What automation have you seen going on? I mean, obviously checkouts at grocery, self-checkouts at grocery
big one.
stores. At Home Depot, they have the self-checkouts. You have tablets now at restaurants. Wait staff can come up to the table and punch in your order, and then they don't have to go back to the kitchen to drop off the order. They can go to the next table. This reduces the number of wait staff you can have. At some restaurants, they've actually instituted, you just have a tablet at your table and you control it. It eliminates the need altogether for wait staff. We're seeing that. Automated postal machines at the post office, as if the post office wasn't already drastically understaffed. Now they have postal machines, which are cutting out even more staff. We're already seeing it in a lot of areas.
Yeah, and I don't know if there are any more that I can think of right now, but I think we're talking about many of the jobs that we don't see, that things we don't interact with, things we don't encounter on a regular basis. Those are starting to change too.
Right. If
And
the mix for car production goes from 10% robotic, 90% human to 90% robotic, 10% human, the average person never actually sees their car being built. You don't even really see it. It becomes sort of invisible.
yeah, but I suppose if you live in a community where there are plants and you have many people working in those types of jobs, you'll hear about it and you'll see the repercussions of that.
But this isn't about cheerleading or complaining or whatever. This is sort of a reality, and we've never been able to slow technological progress merely because we feared or knew it would eliminate jobs. So it's really more a question of being forward-looking. When I look at 2016, I don't think about how can we stop this. I think about how can we work with this to continue or to start improving society based on this changing relationship to work. And I think that that's where people start getting bogged down. They start to figure out, oh, I have a friend who says, I won't use the automated postal centers or the self-checkouts. You not using them is not going to drastically change the progress of this technology.
Right. So, the question is, how can we make our lives better? We need to just always be trying to improve things. And yes, automation is it's here to stay. So, Dave, what are you going to do? I mean, are you going to use the self-checkouts? I don't like using them, but I find that sometimes I have no choice.
I lately have been doing most of my shopping at Trader Joe's and Whole Foods, which I've never seen have self-checkouts. So it doesn't really come up. But if I do go to the post office, the last thing I want to do is wait in line at the post office. So I absolutely use the APCs.
I went to a CVS recently where there were only self-checkouts.
Oh, really?
Yes. First time I've ever seen that.
We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail I received.
Yeah, I just got to tell you guys, me and my buddies are sitting around watching TV here and just happen to flip on your station.
Yeah.
And we're trying to determine if it is actually a comedy or not. This is the most ludicrous, ridiculous I have ever heard in my life. And trust me, mainstream America does not think like you guys. And you are barking up the wrong tree. Have fun with that. Adios.
Lewis barking up the wrong tree for yet another year of record growth, which I will be announcing tomorrow. Yeah, this is a comedy show. Whenever people say this, I say, yeah, it's a comedy show.
Well, there's humor, right? It's not totally inaccurate.
I mean, the funniest thing on today's show was that voicemail. So to the extent that that guy contributed to this being a comedy show, yes, this is a comedy show. On today's bonus show, healthy food labels fueling the obesity crisis, Apple settles tax fraud in Italy, and a pretty interesting story from the subway that Lewis and I have to tell you from yesterday. All of that and more, davidpakman.com/membership. Sign up today. And remember, on Friday, January 1st, 2016, everybody on our mailing list will get notified about a huge 2016 membership discount. Sign up on our mailing list, davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.